Hi there, my name is Nate Kokernot and welcome again to my channel. Today I am going to cover the very last of the Hermetic Principles, and this one is gender. And I just want to give you a warning that, I've probably shared with you all before that the way that my mind works is I love to connect dots and see patterns in things. And now, frankly, that we have 7 Hermetic Principles behind us, there's just so many dots to connect. So, in my writing, like when I wrote my book, I realized I have a very rambling style of writing. I go off on tangents everywhere, and I needed an editor who had a more detail-oriented, who could like hone it in and boil it down to some focus. And I found that in a poet who also happened to be an editor for other people. And I don't have that luxury right now, so try to bear with me as my mind kind of takes us off in lots of different directions today. So to start with, the principle of gender is written in the Kybalion as gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. So the word gender, according to the Kybalion, is derived from the Latin root meaning to beget, to procreate, to generate, to create, to produce. And this is in line with most ancient Hermetic teachings, which have always identified the masculine principle of gender with the positive, and the feminine with the negative poles of electricity. So we have to be really cautious here because words like positive and negative have other connotations that we are not wanting to conflate in all of this. In other words, don't equate or don't conflate positive or masculine with real, which some people tend to do. Just the word positive means real, and feminine, negative, means not real or not good. And don't even conflate this with gender itself, as in on the physical manifestation that some of us happen to have genitalia of a masculine type and genitalia of a feminine type, according to biology. That doesn't, that's too small of a box to try to fit this principle into. We all have both feminine energies, which are yin energies, and we all have yang energies within us. And I'll talk more about that later. But in terms of the scientific kind of plane, we can look about the atom, and there's the nucleus in the middle, and then of course there's these free spirits, you could call them electrons, that can be kind of orbiting around one nucleus in an atom, but they can also go off and find another nucleus to join with. Here's the quote from the Kybalion that gets at this. A feminine corpuscle, electron, it becomes detached from, or rather leaves, a masculine corpuscle and starts on a new career. Now I'm thinking about the 1970s and the 60s when the women's lib movement came about. It actively seeks a union with a masculine corpuscle, being urged thereto by the natural impulse to create new forms of matter or energy. So there is a principle out there that I've spoken of maybe a couple times in my videos before that's called the free energy principle. And this was derived from both studies in biology and studies in information theory. I think they were running in parallel. And the free energy principle, I think, is really key to this dance between the yin and the yang energies. So The free energy principle is basically describing, we could say, the cosmic dance between order and disorder, order and chaos, and how there's a natural just give and take between those two. I look at it, and of course, in miracles terms, as the ego, which is kind of a free radical idea or self identification, is responsible for all of the disorder, and the Holy Spirit, which is the we energy, the one consciousness, one mind, one agenda, one purpose energy, that is responsible for restoring the order. And they will be continually in play. It's like we can see it in waves, the free energy principle. There's people who have studied the waves themselves have noted that there's a precise point when, like, the vertical height of the wave reaches beyond 1/7 of the horizontal distance of the wave, start to finish. That is when the wave cannot sustain itself anymore and the wave breaks. So that's just like on the plane of looking at the ocean if you're sitting at the beach. But I've been studying history, and in that plane, it seems as though there's the same, we could say each decade is a wave, and approximately 80 years, so, a decade plus a little bit. There's kind of an added disorder. The wave breaks, and we're maybe in that wave breaking moment right now, and we go back into order again, where basically the Holy Spirit, or the higher self, the part of us that realizes that we are one with everything, starts to reign again. Reign, R-E-I-G-N. So this, I think the free energy principle is very parallel or analogous to the dance between the yin and yang energies. And, I want to just kind of underline the fact again that we're not trying to place all the masculine energies in like one identity, as in a male, and then all the feminine in the female. It's just, with the principle of polarity, which introduces paradox into the whole system on all planes, we have to allow for the fact that, a lot of women have very masculine energy and a lot of men have very feminine energy. In astrology, we can look at how each sign in the zodiac carries either a positive polarity or a negative polarity. Again, do not conflate these with real or unreal. Just think of them as different energies that both combine in order to generate and create new ideas, new beings, new whatever plane you're on. It's different. And in the zodiac, if you start with Aries and you start moving counterclockwise through the signs, each successive sign hops back and forth from positive yin, positive yang, to negative yin. So Aries is a yang, Taurus is a yin, Gemini is a yang, Cancer is a yin. Another way of looking at it is on the elemental plane, that the fire and the air signs are all yang or masculine energies, and the earth and the water signs are all yin energies in the zodiac system. So yang, Aries is yang, it is also fire. Taurus is yin, it is also earth. Gemini is yang, but it is air. And Cancer is water, and it's also yin. But because again, polarity and paradox exist, it's important not to be too black and white about this. Certain yang energies are more yang than other yang energies in the zodiac. What they really have to do in the zodiac is the level of passivity or assertiveness. But also, there is the debate, and this is true in the Course in Miracles, that the community online, there seems to be an ongoing debate that sometimes it's in the terms of duality versus non-duality, but sometimes it's in terms of right action and just accepting the atonement, the at-one-ment for yourself. Those are two different paths that people seem to kind of interpret the Course through those two different lenses. And in the Kabbalion, he does mention, or they do mention, that a lot of this has to do, or we could really study the principle of gender on the level of psychology itself. And there is nobody, to my knowledge, who is more involved in that particular field of psychology than Carl Jung. I don't know if you guys realize this, but the terms introvert and extrovert, they didn't even exist before Carl Jung. He was the one who made up those words. And in his book, which I have here, The Psychological Types, in which basically he lays out the theory on which MBTI, Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Personality Type System, was based. Just in the introduction to that, he kind of gives expression to this eternal conflict, we could say, between introversion and extroversion. He looks at Goethe's terms, which were systolic and dystolic, I think, as both expressions of the same polarity between the yin and the yang. And the debate in the A Course in Miracles community, I think, really has to do with whether we're doing it right, whether we're being good Course students, if we're just sitting on our couch, meditating and accepting the oneness of everything. Shouldn't we be out there at the protests, taking action, changing things on the physical level, physical manifestation level? And those happen to be women in a lot of cases that are kind of championing that assertion about how to be a good, proper Course in Miracles students. Marianne Williamson, who is, of course, probably the most famous of all Course in Miracles teachers, she's really the biggest champion of this, that we got to get out there and make our voices heard and affect change in the physical world. And then there's people like Nook Sanchez and Corrine Wilson and David Hoffmeister. I heard him talking about it just this morning, that said, no, you can just sit on your couch and meditate and accept the atonement for yourself. There are quotes in the Course like your sole responsibility as a miracle worker or as a teacher of God is to accept the atonement, the at-one-ment for yourself. So different people have different orientations as to introversion and extroversion. And their principles, their values about what's right or wrong in terms of action or inaction are just going to reflect that orientation. If you're an introvert, you are more focused, and again, I don't want to say that we're all introverts or that we're either one or the other. Again, in the MBTI system, Carl Jung specified, in Myers and Briggs specified that there's an order, that you either start with an extroverted function and then you hop to an introverted function, and then you hop to an extroverted function, and then you hop to an introverted function. Or if you're an introvert, you start with an introverted function, and then you hop to an extroverted function, etc., etc. So we all have functions within us that are introverted and extroverted, which means gender. Again, this is all really talking about gender. It's not a, I mean, it can be seen in physical manifestations like males and females, but it's much more fluid than that, and it's really talking more about our own split minds. So one other thing I wanted to say is about the MBTI system is opposites do attract, and that's another expression of this. I've probably seen at least 100 couples now in my office and online, and I've often given them the MBTI quizzes to take home and report back to me what their MBTI type came out as. And I've only had 2 couples in maybe out of 100 or 150 couples that I've worked with who both reported having the same type. And I can tell you both of those were more like roommate energy. There was no passion, no attraction, no flair to there's nothing to learn from one another. And so they were very stale, flat relationships, which says a lot about this principle of gender and about attraction, and how basically we need the opposing energy in order to feel the attraction, to create, to generate, to learn. There's another field of study in psychology called attachment theory, and I often use, I'm not going to go too deeply into attachment theory here, but basically there's dismissive avoidance, who grew up in a house, you could say very generally, this is, way oversimplifying attachment theory, but you could say they grew up in a house in which if you were emotionally disturbing or disruptive to the family, you were told you need to go up to your room, you need to figure out how to calm down, soothe yourself, and then you can come back and join us when you're feeling pleasant again. And there are families where this, what we call the anxious, preoccupied attachment style is more predominant, in which, no, when you're feeling emotional, you hash it out with each other, you communicate about it, and that's how you move through those big times of emotional dysregulation. And they're just 2 different cultures that, each kid who grew up in one has only that example of how people deal with emotions in a community, such as a family. And they just learned that this was the right way. And the anxious preoccupieds learned that this other way is the right way. And so in my therapy, couples therapy business, it's basically like every single couple that shows up, one person I can identify as the dismissive avoidant who wants to just keep their emotions to themselves. They're more stoic. They're usually men, but that's also due to cultural influences that, men teach men not to express emotionally because it's seen as weak and vulnerable. And women tend to be the anxious preoccupieds who are wanting to hash it out and get some kind of shared understanding, and also an understanding as to where the guy is at energetically. Is he safe to approach, or is he not safe to approach? Because men do tend to be bigger than women, so that is a necessary thing. But I often describe the dance because basically attachment theory has everything to do with your phase of life in which you are pre-verbal, which means that it is purely an energetic, emotional, felt experience. And how I describe it is, if you take uh, battery with, or a magnet with a positive and a negative end, and you take another one and put the positives together, the positive end is going to chase the other one around the room. And so this one being chased is the dismissive avoidant in the relationship, and this one who is chasing is the anxious preoccupied. And the anxious preoccupied is feeling desperate to get some resolution to whatever issue they're experiencing on an energetic level. And the dismissive avoidant is feeling desperately smothered and needing to escape into freedom. So it's like this dance of one chasing the other around endlessly, and both of them coming from a place of, why are you doing it wrong? Don't you know the right way to do this is my way? And this really does get to another kind of aspect of the masculine feminine paradox, which is talked about in a lot of kind of spiritual communities these days, that the highest value for the masculine energy is freedom, and the highest value for the feminine energy is connection. They're both just different ways. And what I usually tell people is, you want to understand the other person's way, like the anxious, preoccupied person in the partnership wants to understand the merits of the dismissive avoidance position and move towards the center. And the dismissive avoidant wants to understand the anxious preoccupied's orientation towards this and move towards the middle. So that might look like the anxious preoccupied partner working a little bit more on self-soothing techniques, finding ways to regulate their own central nervous system, and alternately the dismissive avoidant learning how to step into the discomfort of talking about their emotions and listening to another person talking about their emotions. So this principle of gender, it shows up on so many different planes, just like everything. And of course, the psychological plane is the plane of mentalism, which is the first of the Hermetic Principles. And it's actually in the Kabbalion, this is, after he finishes stating, the kind of major themes of each of the Hermetic Principles, he stays with gender for a minute and talks about the psychological aspects of it, because it all really does start with mentalism, the idea that the external world itself is just a projection of our internal world. So back to Carl Jung, he was really focusing on how the introverts. I'm going to read a couple of quotes from the introduction to Jung's psychological types. First quote is about the introverted standpoint. One could describe the introverted standpoint as one that under all circumstances sets the self and the subjective psychological process above the object and the objective process, or at any rate holds its ground against the object. This attitude, therefore, gives the subject a higher value than the object. And then, a little bit later, he says, the extroverted standpoint, on the contrary, sets the subject below the object, whereby the object's secondary importance, the subjective process, appears at times merely as a disturbing or superfluous accessory to objective events. It is plain that the psychology resulting as two totally different orientations. And they are two totally different orientations, except that they both exist within each of us. And we could say on this spectrum of masculine to feminine energy, or yin, yang and yin energy, we all exist somewhere on that spectrum. There are matters of degrees to all this. It's not black and white. We all have extroverted tendencies and we all have introverted tendencies. We all have certain functions in which we tend to look inward, and we have other functions in which we tend to look outward. And that is just because we have split minds. There is part of us that is believing in the self, as in the individual identity of me, Nate Kokernot, or whoever, fill in the blank, as the central figure in this drama, this story. And there's a part of us that remembers the truth, that we are all one, and therefore the we is really the truth. This whole idea of a separate self is just an illusion. So I hope that I haven't confused you too much with my rambling and my tangents today. I guess I'm going to close the series on the Hermetic Principles, but I do want to say that there's a lot more to them than what I presented. The 7 Hermetic Principles are just the foundational level, and then there's other series of principles that you could say they're kind of like sub-principles within Hermeticism. Transmutation, transfiguration, I can't remember. There's a lot of them. But they're also extremely interesting. I'm just not going to go that in depth with the Hermetic Principles because, frankly, the Kybalion is a brilliant, very readable book that's not much more than like 100 pages. So if you're really interested in this, pick a copy of the Kybalion up for yourself and learn it. It's basically the foundations of science before science became too limited in scope, with just accepting space and time as the ultimate reality. All right, that's it for today, and I hope that you all have wonderful days full of blessings and miracles, and I will see you again next time. Bye for now.